Thank you, Josh. Now it is my pleasure to introduce this morning's keynote speaker, Dr. Julie Prezet, Interim Director of the Florida Space Institute at the University of Central Florida. Dr. Prezet holds degrees in aerospace engineering from universities in Toulouse and Munich, and after working as a payload operations engineer for the German Aerospace Agency DLR, earned her PhD in physics at the University of Braunschweig in Germany. Dr. Prezet's research interests are focused around the behavior of dust and ice grains in microgravity conditions, with applications to the early stages of planet formation and the structure and surfaces of small bodies within the solar system. She's currently the interim director of the Florida Space Institute at the University of Central Florida, where her goal is to grow the Institute's research and technology development portfolio while providing exceptional training opportunities for students. Dr. Prezet, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks a lot for the introduction. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, so I guess I don't have to introduce myself anymore. So I'm very happy to be invited today to present to you all. And as part of the invitation, I was asked to present some challenges associated with my field of research. And I like to associate these with opportunities always. So I decided to title my talk Challenges and Opportunities for Space Research and Education in Florida. Let's see if this works. So can I advance slides? Thanks. That was you, right? That was not me. Okay. So just a little bit of background. These are really exciting times for the space sector. So I have a quote here: "Space is existential, from the future of the planet to the future of commerce." And it's not so much the quote itself, like what it contains, that is interesting, but it's who made this quote. And we see here, this is a person that works as a manager at Morgan Stanley, an investment firm. And this person is head of a so-called research space team. So this means that large investment firms, such as Morgan Stanley, now have specific teams that are focused on, managing money around the space economy. So really, we're seeing a great growth climate in the space sector. And just to give you an idea, the economy is around $450 billion as we speak, and expected to reach $1 trillion in the 2040s. And 95% of that space economy is in the so-called space for Earth applications. So this is really seeing a boom in commercialization here. And I have these two graphs, and I know it's very small, but just to give you an idea, in 2016, the portion of the space sector owned by the government was about 25%, and that's expected to be reduced to just 11% in 2040. And then we see a new field here, the red portion, that is completely new, emerges, and in 2040 will hold about 39% of the market. It's, for example, internet services from space. So we really see a very large growth of commercialization in the sector. And that means that the job market is growing fast, with currently 400,000 jobs in the US alone, and that is expected to grow to 1.5 million within the next decade. And I think an important point to consider is that it's not only traditional, STEM jobs that are traditionally associated with space. Like when you imagine, when you hear about a space job, you think an engineer, a scientist, a technician. These jobs are much more diversified now, and I talk a bit more about that in the later slide. We see people who, are requesting specific training in accounting and marketing for the space sector. Let's see. Also sustained interest of the public sector, creation of the Space Command, infrastructure, government infrastructure such as, the Kennedy Space Center launch pads is being leased to private companies. The government invests in commercial space stations, so sustained interest by the government for the space sector. And so the remaining 5% of the space economy is for the space applications. So these are currently a key turning point. And the key turning point is brought upon by the fact that we now have several companies who have demonstrated the use of reusable rockets. They're able to fly people, equipment to space sustainably and at scale. So a lot of people, a lot of equipment will soon, we're getting there, it will have access to space. And this is really a game changer because now you have people and companies that are accessing space for their own interests, and that creates demands in manufacturing. Just a few examples here, there's many more, but, using resources in space, building things in space, transporting from one place in space to another place in space. So a lot of demands come with the growth of the space for space economy. So this is really the time is right for Florida University, so to say, both for the Space for Earth and the Space for Space activities. Space for Earth, this is a great time to better cater to the growing economy. There's a high demand for graduates, consistent funding stream for research. And Space for Space as an emerging field allows, Florida universities to really pioneer and establish leadership in these new fields. So here, new educational demands related to, what I said earlier about diversification of the workforce, development of cutting edge research fields, that, can be dominated still. So what are the current challenges, which I renamed to opportunities? So I'd like to articulate these around the word really diversification, and I have 3 examples here. I think that the current challenges and opportunities are about the role of Florida, diversifying the role of Florida in the space sector and industry, diversifying the role of universities and supporting, the space sector, and diversifying the workforce needed. So to each of these, a few more words. The role of Florida traditionally, right, was the load and launch state, with Kennedy Space Center and NASA being really the strongest space drivers in the region. But this has changed already. We see companies building large, manufacturing facilities close to Kennedy Space Center. They're now building the rockets and the satellites right next to the launch site. And something to look forward to, the role of Florida will diversify even more if we start also providing intellectual content for, space missions. If we start participating more, I mean, we are already, but if we enhance our role in being a space technology development engine, really. So we would, provide the intellectual content, seed these new technologies at Florida universities, and then Florida companies would build and manufacture, spacecrafts around these, and then a rocket built in Florida would be launching from the Kennedy Space Center. So these are our opportunities really these days by being, in Florida. And just a few examples. And I saw that Adrian Dove is on the call today. We already have some principal investigators in NASA space missions. So providing, intellectual content, that's what it can look like. You have Florida faculty that are PIs or co-PIs of instruments and missions from NASA. And so now you have the brains basically of these missions that are in Florida. And us also driving space technology development in the area. I put just an example here. Space photonics is also a new field of space technology, which UCF is investing in. The second line of thought was about the role of universities and how this is diversifying these days. So traditionally, right, initially, universities in the region would provide STEM graduates to NASA and the local industry. But this has been, moving already with much more research going on at the university, much more diversified research in the space sector, and investigators collaborating with industry in their hardware needs and their technology development. So very dynamic environment there right now already. And in the future, something to look forward to is that universities would take an even bigger role in, developing and testing spaceflight rated hardware in-house and providing next generation hardware services to the local industry. And just to give you an example, and I see on the call here, we also have Parks Easter from the Exolith Lab. The University of Central Florida, for example, is in a great position to invest in a facility like we see here, a large bin with lunar simulant dust in it for private companies to come and test their instruments, their rovers that they want to send to the moon. Kennedy Space Center has such a facility, but it's not easily accessible for private companies. Private companies are, oftentimes too small or focused on developing their rovers rather than the testing facility associated with the lunar environment. So, as a university in Florida, UCF is in a great position to invest in such a facility. And so that's what we're doing right now. It's just a good example of how the role of the universities here in Florida can diversify in the space sector. And then the workforce needed by the space sector, I said this earlier, we have this idea of engineers, technicians, and scientists associated with the sector. This has been moving already towards, managing the money. So there's more managing the companies, there's more managers, investment bankers, and accountants. In the future, once the space for space economy develops, there's going to be even more varied needs. There's going to be mining needs, construction needs, tourism. I put pharmacy there, but really anything. And I just like also to not forget that we want the workforce to be diverse in this other sense, that it should represent the diversity of our society too. And to do that, at UCF, we're currently, tackling some of the new educational challenges associated with the diversification of the workforce by creating professional certificates. And I'm naming just a few here, but just to give you examples. For example, there's needs in space electronics specifically, space photonics, space resources, space business. So we're working on creating new professional certificates to cater to these new needs. We're also thinking about a new master's degree in space studies that would, range from space policies and regulations to engineering, but also with some exotic electives such as space pharmacy. And then obviously we want to do all this and keep in mind best practices for inclusion, diversity, and equity and accessibility. So just a few words. I see, a lot of you are from UCF, but not everybody. So UCF is a thriving research university in Orlando with 70,000 approximately undergraduate enrollments, 24% of first generation students and 49% are minorities. And we are a Hispanic serving institution. And in 2015, UCF launched a new collective strategic plan for the next 20 years that was aiming at refocusing a little bit on research. And last year, our president, Cartwright, just launched a strategic investment program to sort of really catalyze this more. And you see the first results here. Research funding has been growing in the past couple of years and is hopefully growing some more in the upcoming future. And this is an excerpt of the strategic investment plan from last year. And you see there's 5 areas of focus, and space technologies and systems are listed as the first one. So UCF is very well aware of the challenges of opportunities of the sector and tackling them head on. We are already, sort of a space university with 30% of Kennedy Space Center employees being UCF alumni. And we have quite a number of NASA awards and NASA investment into research within UCF. And the Florida Space Institute, as I mentioned earlier, is the soft money institute under the Office of Research at UCF. And our mission is to catalyze space research, commercialization, and education, both at the university level and at the state level. And just a quick timeline, FSI was created in '96. Back then, it was on the Space Coast to work in close collaboration with the Kennedy Space Center. But that was a bit early at the time. It was very much still load and launch at the Kennedy Space Center. And so it never really took off. And in 2012, the VP of research at UCF back then decided to move the institute back to campus and to run it as a soft money institute under the Office of Research. Sorry. We are about 25 soft money researchers, part of which are currently at the Arecibo Observatory, which we manage. We have over 20 affiliated faculty, a couple of postdocs, a couple of graduate students, and a little army of undergraduate students. And as I was listing the people, I didn't want to forget about our admin team who support all this, and without whom we can't do anything. Just a few highlights. A couple of years ago, we were leading a mission for NASA heliophysics program, the GOLD mission. We run 3 laboratories for planetary surface and in situ resource utilization. As a soft money institute, with a space-related mission, we really are in a strategic position to initiate and coordinate interdisciplinary efforts, interdepartmental and inter-university projects towards supporting the future of Florida and the space sector. And the way we're doing that is by supporting UCF in their investment in creating a new space hardware development and testing laboratory and initiating the new educational efforts that I mentioned earlier. And I think my time is up, so I'd like to thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Dr. Brizet, thank you so much for joining us and presenting this morning. Folks, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in chat. We do have a few minutes for some Q&A. So I think I'd like to start off by asking a little bit more about the workforce development that you talked about. What are some of the best ways that our faculty can prepare students to work in that future space workforce, in your view?
So it depends really on the field, right? In mechanical and aerospace engineering, this is a highway, right? There's like a pipeline. Sorry, there's a pipeline, from being an undergrad at UCF in that field to, working in the space sector. But for more exotic, let's say you're a business student and you'd like to work in the space sector specifically. So like what's going on right now is that there's maybe a couple of electives, classes here and there that you can take that can sort of show on your CV that you're interested in that, and then potentially you may get, undergrad research opportunities that are related specifically to the sector, but it is not, set up yet. So that's what we're working on. So it has to be driven a little bit by administration, right? Like as a single faculty person, you can participate in the discussion, but it really has to, be a group effort to create new certificates. You start with certificates, I guess, professional certificates, because that's the quickest way of, filling the need. And then new degrees, really, that's a longer process, but yeah. That's how to proceed at the university, I guess.
When it comes to working with private sector partners on commercializing opportunities, can you talk about how the process of doing that? So how do faculty work with companies to commercialize this work? Is there any tips or tricks you could offer?
So we have a really good experience at UCF to spin off, small startups and companies And so there's good support. Like if you have a technology, you know, and you're early on, you're a faculty member, you're a student, you know, there is a great support system at UCF to, you know, spin you off and help you getting started as a startup. So that's one configuration, you know, for the commercialization of your technology. The thing I think that on this topic that I may want to address is, let's say, for example, for the space mission that I mentioned earlier, GOLD, you know, so this was $55 million budget, if I remember well, but only 6 million remained at UCF because that's the portion of the money that was associated with just the brains. The rest of the money was associated with building the hardware. So, you know, like the principal investigator who provides intellectual content really has to get a company to build, you know, their machine, their satellite to do the science. And this traditionally goes out of the university and out of state to another company. And so one idea I'd like to float that's not necessarily directly related to your question, but that I'd like to bring up is, you know, like that's an opportunity we see here that we can keep this money within the state of Florida by going to, you know, Florida companies to build this hardware, maybe to keep this money even within the university by having, you know, our own facility to build and test hardware. So that's another way that, you know, the university faculty collaborates with the private sector, like the mutual need. The private sector is happy to have science contact and the faculty member needs somebody to build their hardware. So there's like an ecosystem that can be built and can remain in Florida.
So when it comes to funding for space-related research, I think NASA, of course, immediately comes to mind, as does perhaps the Air Force or the Space Force. Are there other federal agencies, though, that fund space-related research that you might not typically think of?
Well, I mean, the National Science Foundation is one too. They fund space research and to a certain extent also space technology development, although they don't see themselves as, you know, big drivers in that field. They do fund research for ground facilities, you know, observatories, telescopes, things like that. Then you have, let's say, for example, NOAA, for anything that's space weather related, meteorology from space, you know, Earth observation. They do fund some of the research there. And then I'd like to add that more and more we see funding coming in directly from the private sector, not just federal agencies. Let's say, you know, you're a company, you're building your rover to go on the moon. You'd like a piece of research to happen about a specific topic, you know, and then they come to the research faculty at the university to get that happening. So, you know, the big federal agencies, and then more and more we see the private sector interested in funding research associated with the challenges that they're facing while they're going into the space for space economy.
Well, folks, like I said, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in chat. Give it another minute or so. Dr. Brisette, is there anything that you would add to you know, the context of today's event in regards to interdisciplinary collaboration? What are some of the greatest needs for interdisciplinary solutions specifically, and some of the challenges that you see in that space as well?
Well, I mean, I didn't want to put this in here, but we always need money. If there is, you know, I mean, first of all, I like to say that there are interdisciplinary efforts, inter-university efforts ongoing. And I think we're really in a good climate for that. So, you know, just let them express themselves. But to catalyze things, it's, you know, like financial opportunities are always, you know, a big catalyzer. So if there is a, you know, funding opportunity associated with interdisciplinary efforts, let's say from a federal agency or from a consortium of universities, then that will, you know, definitely cement the efforts and support it. But I'd never want to say that, but money works always.
No, I understand. Cutting edge research does cost money. So
obviously communication, but I feel that, you know, with one of the effects of the pandemic is that we have all gotten more used to these, you know, platforms that we're using as we speak. And it makes some interdisciplinary efforts easier in the sense that you don't have to travel every time, you know, to this city, to that city to actually meet with the people. So I would say that's also in support of, you know, the collaborative efforts at the state level. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you again for joining us. We're going to go ahead and move into the introductory phase for all of our researchers. So if you have time, please stick around and view some of the presentations from researchers across the state.